This program contains strong adult language, violence, and brief nudity. It's everything you're looking for. Live from the Sims Tower in the Robinson Auto Group studio, we are AM 1600 WKKX.
Hello. You got me? Yeah. Oh, my headphones must not have been on. Hey, everybody.
Yeah, mine were way too loud.
Dougie's deaf.
Yes.
Oh, hello, everybody. Welcome to Whispers Radio. Here on AM 1600 WKKX, the Valley's Watchdog, and UPRN, the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. It is... where are we at?
It is
chilly.
It's not
6:07 and
6:07.
44 degrees.
It's chilly. It was
cold.
It was like 80 degrees the last few days.
Yeah. There's freeze warnings tonight.
Yeah, I
not
saw it.
frost.
Freeze until 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Now, what's that mean, a freeze warning, Lola?
It's going to burn all those pretty little buds on your plants and trees. Mm-hmm. A lot of people with fruit trees are really panicked by this because if this goes a couple days, it could ruin the fruit crop.
It's supposed to be 70 on Wednesday.
I know, and then low 50s on Thursday. It's just screwy.
It is, very much so.
But I'd rather have this than ice and snow.
Oh, hands down.
Cold. Absolutely.
Hands down. Give us a call, 304-214-1600, if you're out of the area, 1-866-514-1600. And you know what, everybody? That's toll free. Do we get many calls on that line? No? Yeah. Call that line. Somebody call that line and say hey to us today. 1-866-514-1600. You all right, Lola? Yeah, I got a funny story about that later. I'll tell you momentarily.
I bet you do.
Today, we're switching it up a little bit today. And I don't mean like switching it up like playing oldies music instead of doing some ghosty radio. But I'm talking about instead of doing, ghosts or Bigfoot or space travel or ETs or aliens, we're talking about we're talking about the art of coincidence, consciousness, all that kind of good stuff. Our guest today is Dr. Kirby Surprise, and his book is called Synchronicity, the art of coincidence, choice, and unlocking your mind. It is a stretch from what we usually do, but I think it could be pretty fun.
Not really.
Well, I mean, because there's no ghosties in this.
Stuff. Yeah, this is not crazy.
we did do the animal therapy one time. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay.
Dr. Surprise, are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Hello, sir. Tell us, and I want to read something that I loved this story in your book, because your book is full of like your own little anecdotes, like your own stories, and I want to read this one real quick. It says some clients diagnosed as having thoughts of reference are really experiencing SEs, which is a synchronistic event, that are projections of their thoughts and emotions. I had a client who had suffered from paranoid delusions. He was sure he was being followed by undercover government agents all the time. He said he saw them watching him everywhere. See, this kind of fits in with our listeners.
And with me, because I believe that's probably true.
He had no idea why they were so interested in him, but he was sure he was being watched. In a session one afternoon, he was telling me all about it. I tried to convince him nobody was watching him, that there was nothing to be afraid of. I asked him to come to the office window overlooking the streets, and I challenged him to point out the people who were watching him. At that moment, a car drove by with two men in it. Both stared directly at the window we were looking out as the car slowly passed by. You see, my client explained? There they are, right there.
Yes, indeed.
Tell us about synchronicity and what it is that you're trying to get across on this book.
Okay, synchronicity was a term created by Carl Jung. Synchronistic events happen when these outrageous coincidences that you see in the environment that seem to be meaningful and pointed directly at you. For instance, some people have had the experience of listening to a television or a radio, and suddenly the commenter seems to say something about what they were thinking or feeling or talking about a moment before. Everybody experiences synchronistic events. Carl Jung said that there was no explanation for them, that they were sort of unknowable, because how could anything in the universe arrange outrageous coincidences around you? What I'm saying in the book is that we're actually doing it, and there's actually a rational, scientifically based explanation, and the book shows people that they actually create these coincidental events around them all the time, and that it's actually kind of normal, and that it can show you a lot of things, and it can be a lot of fun.
Now, see, my thought about like coincidences has always been there are no coincidences. Everything that happened had happened for a reason, either to tell you you're on the right path in life, or, God ordained this exact moment, the way it was. That's always been my thought on coincidences. It wasn't a coincidence, and things happen because they're supposed to.
Well, I'm taking a completely different approach.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that there are, maybe forces in the universe, but I'm saying that, what I'm seeing, from working with clients and from playing with this for 30 years is that they're direct mirrors. That what we're actually doing is twofold. We're seeing our thoughts and emotions created and mirrored back to us in the environment as events. So, I've also had, clients who, can I tell you the story of one guy?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we love stories.
Okay, so this guy was referred to me to be assessed and diagnosed.
Uh-huh.
And I was told that he was paranoid schizophrenic, and he had been so for many, many years. So, paranoid schizophrenia has a certain symptom cluster to it. If you're sitting across from someone, who has this disorder, you can sort of tell. There's telltale signs. That's sort of my job. So I'm sitting across from this guy, and he's a little depressed, but he's responding appropriately, and, his emotions seem to be in tune. He's tracking what I'm saying, and I'm, not seeing a schizophrenic. So, I said, look, you don't strike me as paranoid schizophrenic. You're a little depressed, but other than that, you seem fine. What's going on with you? And the guy said, well, yeah, I'm a little depressed, but you wouldn't believe me anyway about the rest of the stuff. So I said, okay, well, try me, So he told me this story that when he was in his early 20s, suddenly he saw an explosion of amazing coincidences around him. He would just watch TV, and whoever was on the news would be talking about what he did that day, and people would come up to him on the street and ask him directions. They were actually commenting on what he was thinking, and a whole bunch of very crazy-sounding stuff. And then he said he realized that God was talking to him through the events of everything around him, using the entire universe as a way to communicate directly to him. And he said that God had some special purpose for him, but he'd never been able to figure out what it is. And they had been harassed by these events all his life, since that time. He was doing this for almost 30 years. So, I asked him, a little more about it, and I told him, look, what I think has happened to you is this. Okay, you saw a couple of coincidences in the environment. Now, these events are mirrors of your own thoughts. They're not false, they're not true, they're just a mirror of what you're thinking. And, he had, when he saw the first couple of events, thought, oh my God, how is this possible? How could anything, be talking to me through televisions and radios and street people and signs and all this other stuff? And he said, it must be God. And he looked out into the environment. God started to talk to him. Well, what had happened was he had come up with an explanation, and then since it's a very direct mirror, I mean, any face you make in this mirror reflects back to you, he got reflections of, God talking to him, because that's what he was looking for. So, I said, look, you're doing this. And, you have the ability to create these events around you. Everybody does it all the time. And, you're seeing whatever it is you're thinking. And he was like, no, that couldn't be it. That's crazy. So I said, okay, back to your room, watch TV, and instead of talking to God, talk to Walt Disney or Bugs Bunny. Okay? And he went, oh, okay. And he comes back the next week and said, oh, my God, I've been talking to myself for 30 years. Because the personality behind the synchronistic events changed completely. Now, the thing is about true delusions is that you can't talk people out of them. Truly delusional people can believe that, they have no spine, that, someone removed it. And you go, well, how'd you walk in here? No, it's gone. Show them an X-ray. No, it's not there. So it's irrational. This guy was actually rational. He was reacting to a mythology that he set up in his own environment. And I've been finding over working with people over the course of 30 years that this is a constant thing that goes on for everybody. This is not unusual. You're doing it right now. The listeners are doing it right now. We all walk around in clouds of coincidences that reflect exactly what we're thinking and feeling. And then people mistake that for confirmations of what they believe. So, for instance, maybe occasionally you've had people on your radio show with far-fetched religious, political, economic ideas.
Yes.
And you wonder, how could they believe that? Mind you, not our belief systems, but theirs. You wonder,
of course, they're the crazy ones.
Yeah, they're the crazy ones. How can they believe that? But they seem rational otherwise. They just have these, far-out beliefs. Well, what happens is, they come up with an idea, and then that thought gets reflected in the environment, comes back in the pattern of what they already believe, and they take it for a confirmation of reality, when in fact it's not. It's just a mirror of what they're thinking. Now, there's two ways in which we do this. One is that, the brain in your head is the universe's largest, most complex supercomputer. It's a biological supercomputer.
Uh-huh.
And the room you're sitting in right now, and that your listeners are sitting in right now, you're not sitting in objective reality. The world around you is a creation that's formed by the brain. It's actually formed in areas of memory. So, do you remember the Matrix?
That's what I was about to say. Are you saying we're in the Matrix docs?
You are. Literally. This is absolute fact. You are, but the Matrix is not an outside computer. It's the brain in your head that creates the reality. So here's your situation.
Uh-huh.
You are the universe's most fabulous piece of technology. You have billions of sensory neurons pointed out into the universe, and they're all digital. They give digital signals like the digital cameras that you buy. These trillions of bits of information a second get fed to this supercomputer in your head. And it assembles all these in an area of memory, a stage, sort of like a holodeck in memory, into what you're experiencing right now. Now, you, the part of you that is consciously aware, that makes decisions, is about the size of a walnut on the very front tip of the brain, behind the forehead. You have no direct sensory connection with the outside world. What you experience is this neurological representation of reality the brain's created for you. Now, the amazing thing about this is the brain doesn't goes even further than just create the reality. It edits it for you. There's actually millions of times more information in the environment, millions of times more patterns than you could ever be aware of. So what the brain does in its marvelous automated systems it's got is it sort of photoshops reality for you. Based on what you've recently been thinking about and concerned about and what your life experience has been, it deletes everything that has no emotional relevance for you. That's why when you drive to work every day, you can't remember every car that you saw and every license plate. The brain says, that's not important, he's not interested in that, so it doesn't form any memory of that. Now, by the same token, things that you are interested in, the brain looks for those patterns. So you will see the patterns around you in the environment that are meaningful to you. And the brain also enhances those patterns. It fills in the blanks, and the patterns are only partial. So, for instance, when you read a page in a book, when adults read, they don't read every word, and they don't read the second half of a long word. The brain scans along the first couple of letters of each word, and then guesses what the word is by the context in the sentence and what the material is, and then skips the rest. It speeds up your reading process. So, I'm saying that the brain itself causes what appear to be synchronistic events partially by following your instructions on what to look for.
Uh-huh.
Now, the other really incredible part is you also change the actual events in the environment by 3 to 5%. And we've known people are doing this since the 1930s. In fact, in experimental design and science, the gold standard of any experiment is called a double-blind experiment.
Yeah.
That's an experiment where the subjects and the person actually hands-on doing the research don't know what the experiment is actually looking for. The reason they do that is the act of observing changes the result of the experiment. Not that the person fudges, just watching it, wanting something to happen, changes the outcome by 3 to 5%. Now, what I'm saying in the book is that although that's been verified with research for decades of people like, throwing coins and dice, and, J.B. Ryan's work at Duke University did a lot of this, what they're also doing is changing the environment to match what they're thinking and feeling. So you are actually going through your environment, changing the course of events around you globally. Now, it appears you're doing it throughout the universe. There's no scale involved, so it's like, changing the randomness of a dice toss is no different than changing the randomness of meteor showers. It operates without scale, and it operates in the principle of meaning. Now, what I've done in the book is a couple of things. I've come up with an explanation for this based on current science and current neuropsychology, and I've told people how they do it and shown them in a way that allows them to do it consciously. Because it turns out that these reflections we see reflect all of our processes. There's no, firewall between the conscious and the unconscious. So what you're seeing in the environment are your unconscious assumptions about things, your past concerns and problems you're trying to work out in life, as well as those thoughts and feelings that you choose to have. And because that conscious part of you in the front of the brain can choose what it looks for and focuses on, the rest of the brain will follow suit and give you that 3 to 5% edge on changing randomness of the environment. So, whereas the New Agers, which, I'm not believing, want to make people think that they can create reality, I'm saying no. Obviously, we don't create reality. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had to pay for my iPhone. I would have just put one up. But we do have some influence over the order of events. And so I've written a book that gets people out of the sort of house of mirrors of bouncing around in their own thoughts and gives them this ability that they're already using. This is not, you don't have to train to do this. It's not an exercise. It's not like, you have to go meditate at the feet of, some guy in the Himalayas for 10 years. You're doing it right now. And I'm trying to give this with a rational explanation and, turn people on to the fact that this is a normal ability. This isn't paranormal. This is, extremely normal.
Now, we have a couple questions in the chat room. Going back to when you were talking about delusions, New York Lily asks, what are your thoughts on spiritual and religious people? Do you feel that they are just delusional as well, or?
Well, I'll give her my personal delusions in response to that. Okay, one of the things about synchronicity is there's a state in Zen Buddhism where the subjective and objective, the inner and the outer worlds merge. People call it enlightenment. The experience is called satori. In that, you are like the Dalai Lama who goes up to the hot dog stand and says, "Make me one with everything." The full-blown experience is called satori. Okay, your individual sense of separation disappears, and there's only one. Synchronistic events are tiny satori. You're seeing a piece of yourself, a piece of your thoughts and feelings merged with the environment and reflected back at you. Now, it sort of proves out in a lot of ways that individuality is an illusion. The part of this that's tricky is the meanings that you assign to it. So, people will see a universe based on any belief system they have. For instance, in your mind, and again, not one of something we would believe, mind you, but pick a fundamentalist religion, that you think is crazy.
Okay.
The fact is, those people are not irrational. What's happened is they get indoctrinated into a belief system that's based on, from the time you're born. Let's think about, some of the radicals we know that blow people up or, will, go ape on you if you, criticize their religion. they're trained from the very beginning in their lives, in their family structure, to believe this. And they project this belief, because they've been taught to think in this pattern, out into the world. So suddenly, it looks like a Christian world. It looks like an Islamic world, or a Buddhist world, or a shamanic world, because that's what people are actually looking for.
It's almost like we do a lot of politics on this, the far left and the far right.
Exactly.
When you're so obsessed with each little issue, you can see, oh, everybody else is crazy.
Well, exactly. I mean, if you look at, any fundamentalist, political position, you wonder, well, how can they believe that? There's all this contravening evidence, and there's these areas of gray. Well, the more deeply they're convinced of something, the stronger that pattern shows up around them. So they wind up like the delusional guy who thought he was being chased by God. They see the world in those terms, and it's completely obvious to them that's the way things work, until, some crazy person from the other side of the aisle starts to argue with them. Yeah. When in fact, we all do this all the time. Now, even in science, we're finding that there is no separation. Like Einstein came out, and one of his great revelations was there's no such thing as individual particles in the universe. That's an illusion. Now, there's areas where space is a little denser than others, but there's no hard edges on anything. That's something that we assumed in Zen Buddhism. Again, individuality, they're saying, well, it's sort of an illusion of your brain processes, that, we are not separate from the environment. Synchronistic events are a direct demonstration that there's no separation involved, because you can, right now, look out into the environment and bounce your thoughts off it, and you'll get coincidental events that follow the meaning of whatever pattern you choose. You can play chess with the outside world. You can play out Star Wars or Tolkien or your religion, anything you want, and you will see the environment around you reflect your thoughts. Now, and it's not a scary thing or a paranoid thing. It's a fun thing. It's a skill that we evolved as organisms to help us navigate through the world. I look at us through the lens of neuroscience. We evolved as grassland hunters. We were on the plains of Africa looking out over miles of waving grass with shadows and patterns of sunlight, and what we evolved to do was match patterns. We looked out there and completed the impartial patterns, figured out what's camouflaging from us, what's prey, what's going to eat us, and we tweak that 3 to 5%. Now, in the modern world, that means that with these wonderful feedback sources like radios, TVs, other people, traffic signs, everything that's around us, we can actually watch our internal processes by looking at the meaningful events outside of us as well.
Now, on that kind of ties in with another question we got when we were talking about this matrix, and when you say, our brains create, the reality that's around us,
they create the representation that we live in.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
How is it that? How do I want to say this? How is it that everybody can see the same thing, but then again everybody can't see the extras that your mind is creating? Like, I can see that my phone is red, and Lola sees my phone is red. How does that happen that we're connected in that way, but not in the way where we are living in the Lord of the Rings land?
Okay, because you're each. Well, there's a couple of ways to think about this. First of all, you don't exactly see the same color red. Okay, you see whatever your nervous system interprets as red. Okay.
Okay.
Now, the real question. Can I rephrase your question a little bit?
Yes.
Okay. So, the question really is, how come we're not eternally screwing up each other's perceptions of reality with our thoughts?
That works.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you'll excuse me, that question is sort of like arguing flat Earth to people. Science has changed a lot. So, for example, it used to be a bad science fiction joke when someone said that in some parallel reality, Elvis is still performing in Vegas. Now, believe it or not, with string theory, they solved unified field theory equations back in the late 90s. And what they discovered was that we are riding on a tiny, thin, almost quantum, which is the smallest possible imaginable shift, membrane in the universe. There's a 11 dimensions of physical reality, and we ride on this like thin bubble membrane, and there's an infinite amount of them in the space around us right now. Each membrane is a separate universe that's a little different than this one. Each one is a probability. So the leading physicists in the world right now are saying that we're living in a matrix of infinite alternate probabilities right now. So it's not a joke anymore. Elvis really is right next door performing in Vegas because there is a universe that's real where that's occurring. Now, people's thoughts about parallel universes has always been the bad science fiction series kind of thought, where, like the last season of every bad science fiction show, there's evil twins in another universe, so they jump to some parallel reality. They've run out of stuff to do. The writers don't have anything else to do. So, but what's actually happening is time itself progresses from one of these membranes to another, at the speed of light. So we're actually passing through an infinite amount of these probabilities every moment. Each one of us has some ability to steer in probability by our thoughts and emotions. So the flat Earth model is sort of your thoughts and emotions create some kind of gravitational field and events cluster around them, which obviously doesn't work because the amount of energy that would take would be like hideous. What's actually happening is you're not changing anything. You are moving yourself into areas of probability that match what you're feeling and thinking. Now, we don't have a huge ability to do this. We have like a 3 to 5% ability to do this. It's partial, which is the thing that's confused people for so long. It's like, well, if you can create these patterns, how come reality itself doesn't change?
Uh-huh.
Well, it's because you're moving through many realities at once. Just being here, you're moving through a variably infinite amount of probable choices at this very moment.
So how is it that we don't interact with each other's?
We do, to some degree. We exist over ranges of probability, and some of our ranges of probability substantially overlap. So, the same president gets elected in the same universe, and, we have, the same diseases because we're exposed to the same toxics, or basic cause and effect still applies. But the order of the events, the particular events that show up in your set of probabilities, is partially, not completely, just a little bit, determined by your thoughts and feelings. So each person has somewhat, a little bit of an independent range and a lot of overlap with everybody else. So it's not mutually exclusive.
Okay. I'm trying to absorb all of this.
Well, the fun part is, what I'm giving you is an explanatory fiction. Okay, it's a good story that fits the known facts. The fun part is, all you have to really understand is that you can bounce your thoughts off the environment, and the environment will change. For instance, you ever see a guy with a pet bird? He keeps the bird in a cage, and occasionally they'll put a mirror in the cage with the bird.
Uh-huh.
The mirror is there to keep the bird company. The bird brain, so to speak, doesn't know that it's looking at a reflection. It thinks it's looking at another bird, and it starts to argue with it. Keeps it company, keeps it from getting depressed and lonely.
Yeah, it's like it's married.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Synchronistic events are a very direct mirror into the environment of what you're thinking and what you're assuming at each moment. So you can do the same thing with the environment that the bird is doing with the mirror in the cage. The book I've written is about doing this without becoming lost and delusional about it. Doing it and knowing what the real limitations are. Doing it and knowing what it's good for and what kind of fun and mischief you can have with it.
Okay.
You all right, Lola?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, explain to me, if you will, can we revisit the bubble membrane going through time?
Sure.
What I was seeing in my brain, like, Lola's...
No, go ahead.
Is this, like, our own personal, like, bubble journey? Or is this, like, as a whole we are moving through this?
Well, let's think of it this way, okay? Let's say you have a library, and there's an infinite amount of books and pages in the library, and all the books are, like, stacked together, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're all sort of in the same book, but the direction we take moves through different pages. The thing that trips people up is people believe they only exist in one reality at a time. This is sort of the flat earth model that people used to be, like, oh, there can only be one chain of cause and effect at a time. We are multi-dimensional beings. Up until 20 years ago, 4 dimensions was it. We had 3 dimensions of space and time, and that was it. Just physical reality, the stuff on that little membrane, there's 11 dimensions to that.
Now, how do we define these 11 dimensions?
You can only do it mathematically because, what I'm saying is that the mystics and philosophers of the past were laughed at in the 20th century. So it was like, oh, those ignorant, crazy yogis and stuff, and clairvoyants telling us about these alternative realities that are actually versions of thought and emotion. How ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Well, they're not laughing anymore because it turns out that there are all of these alternative dimensions and realities. Now, the mystics of every religious tradition, like, the inner esoteric folks, were always telling us that we were one with God, we were one with the universe, and that our thoughts and feelings were energy in their own right and matter in their own right. Well, it turns out they're correct, and that we exist in a lot more dimensions at once than we ever thought we did. Now, when you're awake going through your daily routine, you're not aware of a lot. You're not aware of them because the physical animal doesn't need that. But you, the part that makes decisions in the everyday world, can be if you choose to. And the way these dimensions manifest is by these meaningful events in the environment. Now, it's true that there are a lot of synchronistic events that are just sort of tricks of your brain processing. They're patterns that are highlighted because you were thinking about them. You buy a blue Toyota, and then suddenly you see all these blue Toyotas.
No, yeah, everybody, right? I think, has seen that one.
Now, the blue Toyotas were always there. It's just they had no meaning for you before. So now suddenly they're showing up because you've been thinking about blue Toyotas. In the actual outside world, though, you're probably running across 3 to 5% more of them than usual because you're thinking about them. That's because you're passing through areas of probability where there just happen to be more of them, slightly more of them, than usual. And this ability has been around forever. I mean, our ancient ancestors had the same neurological capacity that we did. They were as smart as we were. And they were dancing around with animal masks, pretending to be deer, trying to get the game to come to them. Now, they weren't stupid, and they weren't ignorant, but what they did do was they noticed that there was some slight correlation between their internal states and what happened in the world around them, and they were trying to take advantage of it. They were trying to make as strong an image of what they were looking for as they possibly could. And they did this by, basically psychodrama. Mm-hmm. They did rituals. They danced around like deer, and hunters went after them because they wanted to see that reflection in the environment. And to, like a 3 to 5% degree, that actually does work. And long-term, 5% edge in the world is a big deal. It's a lot more than most evolutionary adaptations give most animals.
I got another one that kind of goes along too. Infomaniac Housewife in the chat room is asking, with the infinite possibilities, does that mean that anything's possible?
No, there's things that are out of range. Okay, so most people have heard that in astronomy we measure things in terms of light years. Mm-hmm. Okay, so light years are measures of time. So distance can be measured in time. Okay? I'm saying that some of the dimensions that we already exist in are dimensions where distance is probability. So, for instance, the distance in probability to me picking up the glass of water on the table in front of me and taking a sip, extremely small. Uh-huh. The distance in probability to my book becoming a bestseller or me becoming president, pretty large. Okay, so we have some influence. We cannot get to probabilities that are out of range. Okay, so it's sort of like, if you're driving down the highway at 100 miles an hour and, the off-ramp you want is like 10 feet on your left, sorry, you're going to miss the ramp. Okay, there's inertia involved and you can't make that big a turn. And, by the same token, if, you're driving a Hummer and you have 1 gallon of gas left, you're not going from New York to California. there's practical limits involved, which is what I'm trying to show people in the book, that, there are things that are within range. But on the other hand, it can seem, because they're reflecting meaning, that these events are cosmic, that, the entire universe is involved, and that the whole world is in on it, and blah, 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 blah. But when in fact, you're telling yourself a story, and you're seeing a mirror reflection.
Okay, I got on your blog, and the first one is about whoever was proofreading your book decided to do an experiment with Australia, and how all of a sudden, because he started thinking about one thing in Australia, never been there, never met anybody from there. He meets somebody from Australia, and all these Australian things start popping up. Is it kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy, too, that if you start willing these things and then looking for them, then of course they're going to happen.
Exactly. Only the thing with the self-fulfilling prophecy is it implies that what happens to you is merely psychological and has no actual manifestation. It's like the self-fulfilling prophecy, everybody I date's going to turn out to be an alcoholic. Well, and where'd you find your last husband? In a bar.
Yeah. Or reading your horoscope, and the next day is going to be a very bad day at work, and you're going to meet a tall, dark stranger. Well, of course, you're going to meet a tall, dark stranger because you're looking for a tall, dark stranger, and you're going to have a lousy day at work because you're anticipating a lousy day at work.
Right, and on top of that, if that's what you're looking for, your day will actually slightly arrange itself to be lousier than it could have been on top of your interpretation. So what I'm saying is you have a choice about the 5% influence you have, as well as what patterns you look for.
Mm-hmm.
And, and it doesn't have to be any heavy-duty religious or political thing. I mean, you could just plain have fun with this.
Yeah, I think it would be fun to
by the way, it also proves, when you see this happening, it proves that you are not just a physical being. It proves that there is some part of you that is freed from time and space, because, the causal part of this is these other dimensions. It proves to you that you're not just limited to being the physical creature that you think you are right now.
Now, when you talk dimensions, you said 11-dimensional beings, do you mean okay, you started touching on the sci-fi event of you have an evil twin in another dimension.
Fringe.
Yeah, Fringe. Are you talking that type of dimension, or are we deeper than that?
Well, here's the thing. What our brain does is match patterns. Okay, and it takes sensory patterns from your senses and basically associates them and stores them and is brilliant at moving them around. These other dimensions that the physicists and mathematicians are telling us about are not based on sensory information. Okay, so you don't experience them directly. But we know that in order for the forces of the physical universe to operate as they do, there's 11 dimensions. Some of them are as small as an individual particle. I mean, string theory has taught us that the universe is a whole lot weirder and stranger and more complex and wonderful than we ever dreamed it was. And one of the things I want to get across to people in the book is that you don't need an answer. Okay? People have this idea that they have to reduce something to an answer and then they can forget about it. Well, the fact is that we evolved dealing with a universe that's vastly more complex than any of us could ever figure out. So if you can get comfortable with the fact that there's always more there than you think, then you can start to not be so uptight about seeing events like this and playing with this stuff, because you'll always realize that, well, there's always more to meets the eye, okay, and that's okay. It's okay for it to be too complex. The only people who actually understand the nitty-gritty, of string theory and probability are people who have 3 PhDs in mathematics. Okay, but the rest of us down here, back down close to the ground, can do some fun things that the people at CERN haven't figured out yet. Maybe you've heard about there's this legendary stoned college pastime where people will put The Wizard of Oz on TV, turn off the sound.
Dark Side of the Moon.
Right. And that it gets hysterically funny.
I have a synced up version somewhere of the movie with that running parallel with it.
Well, what's happening is you are doing it. You're playing with synchronicity right there. Okay? You are the one who creates the relationships between the soundtrack and the movie. And what I'm saying is, you can create the relationships between the soundtrack on the tape deck in your car and the license plates that are passing by, or the next person you talk to, or any two sources of information, or the entire universe at once. You're the one who does it. So that kind of college-like, head game is actually the way the world really works, and it should be just as much fun.
I'm really, Jordan was right. I like this conversation because you're right about that. Everybody thinks that they have to have an answer. Well, you know what? Life's too short to take everything so seriously that if you can't move on without a concrete answer to things that don't have an answer.
Well, then you're going to be set in concrete.
Yeah, people like that drive me crazy.
Now, I'm a scientist, and I love the scientific method. And one of the things I love most about it is something that a lot of scientists forget. Science doesn't give you exact answers. Science is about how probable something is to be true. So whenever you get, an answer from a piece of research, what you get is, well, we think it's significant within, 2 to 5%. And here's the margin of error, and here's a bunch of mathematical qualifiers, and, oh, by the way, we also found this piece we can't account for. It's an exact way of saying this is our best guess. And I think people should revel in that. Now, personally, I sort of go with what's most probably true. And by far, from all the research, what's most probably true is that we affect the environment all the time. And I also think we take advantage of each other with this. I think that, you were asking questions about spirituality earlier.
Uh-huh.
Okay, in the book, one of the things I say is, religion and spirituality have nothing to do with each other. Okay? Religion is a set of behavioral mandates, dictates. And if you can look at a religious system and change the behavioral, commandments from God said you should to the king said you could, you're looking at a human-created thing. Real spirituality is about connectedness. It's about states of consciousness.
Relationship.
Exactly. And most religions are, sociological systems that define who's not in your group. What I'm saying is things like synchronicity prove connectedness. And you can look for your connectedness, and there's no behavioral rules. There's no judgment about it. It's a direct manifestation of seeing part of yourself, and it's not judgmental. There's no consequences to it. You can do whatever you like with it, and because you're only affecting your own realities, you're not going to be affecting anybody else's, so you can play any story you want.
Lola.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Are you getting this?
Yeah.
Now, because you are you're a doctor of counseling psychology, you're not just a doctor of something you found on the internet.
No, I'm actually licensed.
We've had all kinds on this show.
Yeah.
And you have a practice, you have clients, you
Well, I work for the state of California. I work with mentally ill inmates in the prison system.
Wow.
And my particular specialty is the ones who have psychotic and delusional disorders. So I sort of have a black belt in determining the state of other people's reality testing.
Now, how is it, and just because, you brought up where you practice, in situations like that where they are so confined with what their reality can be, how do you explain this theory to them, or do you?
Well, most people I don't bother with it. What I do is, if I find a client where it's relevant, where the person is not actually delusional, it's like, I'm not seeing some hardwired mistake in the brain that I'm never going to be able to fix. If I think they've just been looking at reflections, I'll teach it to them. I'll tell them what they've been doing, and if they're receptive, I'll give them a couple of exercises to prove to them they're doing it. Now, the thing is, it's reflective, and it's got nothing to do with your state of mental health. So, there's schizophrenics who have bizarre delusional systems. They project those into synchronistic events as well. all of your internal processes. One of the, the not so fun thing about synchronicity is that, if people, for instance, were abused, neglected, or molested in early childhood, those scars stay in the unconscious pretty much forever and often get projected into these events. Some people live out their traumas in the events around them forever until they realize they're doing it. So some of the research been done on synchronistic events says that, they're more often manifested, from traumatic events and from peak spiritual experiences. And in both cases, the driving force is the amount of emotion behind them. Your brain tags things as significant by giving them a thing called emotional valence, emotional importance. Nothing without emotional importance ever gets remembered. Things that have a lot of emotional importance get projected all over the place onto everything.
Is that why, like, you mentioned the drive home, sometimes you can drive home and not remember your drive at all?
That's exactly right. That happened to me about a year or two ago. It was like pre-dawn on the way to work, and I had no interest in going to work, mind you. So, I was thinking completely about something else, and suddenly I was 15 miles past my exit. And, I was driving the car. I didn't get a speeding ticket. I wasn't drifting. I wasn't asleep. And what happened was, what I was thinking was so much more interesting emotionally than where I was going, that I didn't form any memories of the task of driving. And that happens to people all the time.
That happens to me all the time. And it's kind of scary when you get to where you're going and you can't remember. But then I figure, well, if I don't remember anything, then nothing of any import happened.
Well, you were there. You were fully conscious when you were doing it. It's just that it wasn't important enough to remember. In fact, in a lot of emergencies rooms, there's a drug that doesn't kill. I mean, you get somebody in a car accident severely injured. You may have to do procedures on them, but you can't give them an anesthetic because you're worried about stopping their heart or their breathing.
Uh-huh.
So you wind up doing surgery on people without anesthetic. But they have a drug in the emergency room that interferes with the formation of memory. And what happens is they do the procedure, then they hit the person with the drug, and they don't remember it happened. And the brain works somewhat the same way. If you deaden the emotional centers in the brain, you tell them that nothing really of worth is happening, it doesn't pass the experiences out of short-term memory into long-term memory. So you have no memory. Everything that you ever remembered right now in your entire life is a current pattern of electrical activity in the brain. If the neurons don't form the pattern, there's no memory. The other fun part is nothing that you remember happens exactly the way you thought it did. Because what your brain does is take the experience and it breaks it up into millions of different kinds of associative patterns before it stores it away. And every new experience changes very slightly all the other memories you've ever had. So in a very real sense, you are living always in the present moment of what your brain function is.
Well, that's why eyewitness testimony is probably the most unreliable that there is, because everybody taints whatever they've seen happen with previous experiences and emotions, and that's why no two eyewitness statements are ever the same.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew that one. Boy. Wow. I knew something.
Well, can you leave us with a how do I say? Because you say you give people like
advice,
not advice. Like a challenge, like a
exercise.
Yeah, an exercise. That's the word I was looking for.
How many minutes do I got?
6.
Okay, here you go.
Okay.
Quick version.
Okay.
So Shakespeare said, "All the world's a stage."
Right.
So you're living right now on a stage in memory. So here's the game you're going to play.
Okay.
You're going to pretend that you've just woken up on stage, that you've realized that the entire world around you is basically a holodeck or a matrix computer, whatever, and that it's all being run from some people in the background. You're in a theater, you're on stage, and you have a stage crew. Now, the stage crew is the ones who arrange the synchronistic events for you. They're the ones who signal to you by creating coincidences. They also take requests. Now, the purpose of the stage is for all the actors on the stage, all the other people, to play out the dramas of their lives, to be creative, and to pretend. The stage crew is helpful, highly intelligent, and has a hell of a sense of humor. So Your first task is to wake up, realize you're on stage, and look out into your world for an acknowledgement from the stage crew in the form of a synchronistic event that you know they're there. And once you see some of the events, you start talking to the crew and telling them what patterns you'd like to see. Now, the fun part of this is I give this exercise out to groups of people, and within a couple of weeks, a few people get in contact with me and go, I never realized that there's angels helping me, and the UFOs are changing events around me, and the government really is out there with the super tech. And I go, no, dude, you created this, remember? Okay, we set this up in the beginning. You were going to tell yourself a story. Well, there's your story.
Okay.
That's fun. Anybody any of our listeners that are out there doing that, feel free to email me, whispers1600 at gmail.com. Tell us your story. We'll send them on to Kirby, and I'm sure he'll like that.
Well, you could also go to my website, which is howsynchronicityworks.com, and, leave your stories. Read the stuff, poke around, and leave me some stories of your own.
You can post it right on your site?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. That's a lot of fun.
Be prepared.
Lola's already on board. She's got a notebook with her.
I do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Surprise. This is very...
it was fun.
It was very interesting. I wasn't sure what I was going to be getting into with this. I've had your book, and I like all the coincidence stories in it. I really enjoyed that. But I really did enjoy your points behind it and your ideas.
Well, thanks for having me on.
How Synchronicity Works by Dr. Kirby Surprise. Sir, thank you very much, and I'll email you when I get people's stories in.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, you have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
That's it for us, everybody. I'm stuttering.
I know you are. Are you going to do this exercise, both of you?
Yes.
Yes.
She sounded more convincing than you did.
Yes!
That's because he's stuttering.
For some reason, my stagehand is making me stutter.
Uh-oh. Boy, you better get some new stagehands.
All right.
This could be problematic.
Right. Mm-hmm. Until next week, everybody. Don't be afraid. Only believe.